Okay, I'm happy to welcome everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm Erin Moore. I'm director of the School of Architecture and Environment, and I'm associate dean in the College of Design at the University of Oregon. I hear that more than 150 people have RSVP'd for the event, and I think this reflects well on the values of our school community and on our extended community. And I think it also marks the importance of our taking time to gather around these topics. They're important, and I thank you for being here. So this event is part of the Design for Spatial Justice Initiative in the School of Architecture and Environment. This is an initiative that was shaped by questions posed by students, faculty, and faculty leadership over the last 2 years, and years before that, I should say. The Design for Spatial Justice Initiative is shaped by an understanding that professional schools of design and design pedagogy also in North America have disproportionately excluded cultural perspectives outside of European colonial traditions. The initiative is designed to begin to address the very real limitations that presents for the advancement of knowledge and of cultural thought, and then to participate in helping to build a community of students, designers, and scholars whose excellence is inseparable from their diverse and global perspectives. In doing that, my hope is that we're building our capacity to take on the hardest and the highest stake questions in design for environmental and social justice, with a particular focus here on design and design practices. So this year, the initiative has supported the work of 6 visiting faculty in Design for Spatial Justice. So given that the initiative was shaped very much by questions about design education that students have raised, and now that we're 9 months into the first year of this 3-year initiative, it is appropriate to be having a student-centered conversation about topics in spatial justice, design for spatial justice. So thanks for being here. I'd like to thank the students, the faculty, and the faculty leadership who've supported the initiative, particularly visiting faculty fellow in Design for Spatial Justice, Karen Kuby, for organizing the event, and to introduce the moderator of tonight's event, Gerardo Sandoval. Gerardo Sandoval is Associate Professor of Planning, Public Policy Management at the University of Oregon, is the inaugural Equity and Justice Fellow in the College of Design, and in that role, he was instrumental in shaping this first year of the Spatial Justice Initiative. I couldn't be more grateful. Dr. Sandoval's research is situated within intersections of urban planning, immigration, and community change. As an urban planning scholar, he examines the links between immigrant communities, transnationalism, and placemaking. He's been appointed by the governor of the state of Oregon as a commissioner for land conservation and development, and as a council member for the state of Oregon's Housing Stability Council. It's an honor to have him moderate tonight's event. Gerardo.
Okay, thank you, Erin. Yeah, welcome everyone. Good evening. So I'll be your moderator for the event. It seems like so far we have 66 participants. So that's a really good turnout. Before I started, I wanted to mention to our University of Oregon students that we have a mini grant award called the Equity and Justice Student Organizing Mini Grant. And it's related to coming up with a project that helps students ameliorate the effects of COVID-19 with an equity lens. So I just wanted to quickly mention that. That's due June 12th. And if you have any questions about that, please let me know. So we have a panel tonight. I've really enjoyed interacting with the fellows. They've helped me to understand spatial justice in a different way. So I just wanted to give a brief kind of academic framing in terms of how I view spatial justice. Now, spatial justice is not a new concept. And I see it as having kind of 2 lenses. So one is a geographical lens. So there you have authors like David Harvey and It's his book, Social Justice in the City, that was published in the 70s. Henry Lefebvre, Production in Space, that's also in the 1970s. And then that was kind of updated by Edward Soja in his book, Seeking Spatial Justice. So that's how I kind of see that framing from a geographical sense. From a social cultural sense, I really appreciate the work of Susan Feinstein. She's an urban planner, and she wrote a book called The Just City. Iris Miriam Young's book, The Politics of Difference, has a great framing of equity. And then Nancy Fraser, she talks about redistribution and recognition issues. So I really think it's the combination of these two kinds of lenses that we're talking about. I guess my perspective on social justice has to deal with the democracy, equity, and redistribution and recognition. I think those are kind of the goals that we're seeking. Okay, but enough of that. We want to get to the panel. So I'm going to describe what we're going to be doing tonight. We are going to have, for 25 minutes, I've developed some questions for the panelists that are actually based on your feedback. It was great feedback, so thank you for that. And then we'll have the panelists speak for about 3 minutes to 4 minutes each on each question. And then we're going to make this more participatory. So we're going to break you off into different groups, and each fellow will lead a discussion, very informal discussion related to spatial justice issues. And then we're going to pick someone to basically report back on some of the things you talked about. And then I'll go ahead and close the session. Where I'm going to try to link all the themes together and see how, see where the discussion went on that. First, I want to introduce the Spatial Justice Fellows. They, they have really great experiences and great CVs. So I just took like the key aspects of it. So we'll start with Mena Agha. She's a researcher and architect with a PhD in architecture at the University of Antwerp, and that's in Belgium. And her research lies in the intersection of spatial production and social justice, especially spatial issues and gender relations within the context of displacement. Next, we have Priyanka Bista. And actually, Priyanka's joining us today from Nepal. So I think she woke up at around 5 in the morning to join us. So thank you, we're very grateful for that. So she's a Nepali Canadian architect and designer. She's working at the intersection of public interest design and biodiversity conservation. Over the last 6 years, she has been working closely with marginalized youth from urban informal settlements to rural villages to help build their technical and design capacity to contribute towards inclusive and sustainable development in their communities. Next is Karen Kobe, and she's an urbanist specializing in housing and health. She's also the editor of a very well-known book called Housing as Intervention, Architecture Towards Social Equity. And most importantly, she was the one that organized this event. So thank you again, Karen, for that. And next is Corey Parker. He's a landscape architect and scholar working at the intersection of poverty, movement, and landscape. And he has a doctorate in geography from the University of California in Davis. Craig Wilkins, he's a leading scholar of African Americans in the field of architecture. His books, essays, articles, and public talks explore the rich social, cultural, political, historical, and aesthetic conditions of often ignored practitioners of color. He serves on the faculty of the University of Michigan, their College of Architecture and Urban Planning. So as you can see, we have a really distinguished panel. And so I'll just go ahead and get to some of the questions. So like I said, we took these questions from people that RSVP to the event, and I kind of put them all together, and they relate to two issues. So one is the meaning of spatial justice, and then the other one is student activism and professionalization. So why don't we start with the first one? So what does spatial justice mean to you? And how does spatial justice relate to your academic and professional activism work? Provide some examples from your own work as it relates to racial justice, environmental justice, gender justice, redistributive justice, and any other forms of spatial justice. So it's really about what spatial justice means to you. And why don't we start off with Minna?
Hi, thank you everybody for joining us, and thank you for the questions. Well, I tried to think of a smart thing to say to answer this question, what is spatial justice? And every soundbite definition was very problematic, and I had to scratch it and think, how do we put this into words? But the only things I could think about is what spatial justice could not be, but what are the things that we need to avoid? And I could look at it being something that is both, spatial justice should be both pluriversal and indivisible. By that, I mean, by pluriversal, mean recognizing that there are other ways of being and thinking. So, for example, after years and years of knowing my indigenous language, I just started thinking that there are 5 ways to ask the question, where? That means space means something completely different. And when I settle in and hear through that voice, I can see a different definition of the space. That means starting to speak about spatial justice to start from the point that everybody has the right to define space itself. What does it mean? What kind of network of meaning is allowed to be invalidated and has the right to manifest and develop? And the other aspect of it is it being indivisible. So what happens is that even in our efforts to perform some activities that would solve a problem and promote issues of justice, we get colonized by the system we live in, and these activities become washing. And especially for us in architecture, we fall into greenwashing. So you often see many politics of pinkwashing and whitewashing. And for us, we have so many projects that are so directed towards environmental justice. The justice is indivisible. We cannot have a solar fed area while the workers on the other side of it are not well paid. We cannot have a street without cars while we are marginalizing the workers who work on the outskirts of the city. So it should be indivisible. So these are the things I was able to articulate to answer this question, which is a very important question to start with here. And as for me, in my practice or research, I think my first activity or my first task is to decolonize myself, to start to take critical distances from all the things that we perpetuate and do often in our practice, and ask myself, why am I doing that? Who am I an agent to? What kind of agency am I performing here? Yeah, and then get clash with the fact that I want to get paid and I want a job as an early career academic, and you go into these things and you see the injustices in your performance as a space maker or a person who has interventionist tendencies within this field and wants to build things, and the conflict between the different esteems and the different places in which I exist, and people who are here defined as people of color, I think would understand this idea of code switching, and then when the codes start conflicting with each other. And I see that clearly now within my field, if I try to, within my practice, when I try to do this decolonize myself exercise. But I think it should be done.
Okay, thank you, Mena. Can we continue with Priyanka, please?
Hi, Gerardo. Hi, everyone. Sorry, I'm joining in from Nepal very early morning, so I hope to be as coherent as possible. So I think in terms of spatial justice, in terms of environmental justice, I actually work in biodiversity conservation in Nepal, and this is not a field that I started off picking or was specialized in, but really it was actually inspired by the indigenous people and their relationship to landscape that actually brought me into this path, into this field, and into the project that I've actually co-founded called the Vertical University. So it's not a real university, it's actually mocking the idea of traditional, the way in which, who provides knowledge, who are the knowledge providers, the knowledge holders, and how do we define knowledge? So in our case, we define knowledge as knowledge that farmers and indigenous individuals living across, rural Nepal possess of their landscape, and also in terms of, and how do you sort of take that knowledge and bring it or pass it down to the next generation. That's sort of what our project does. And so biodiversity conservation is a field that is very heavily sort of science-based or focused on conservationists only. There's little to no room where indigenous people have a say, in terms of the conservation of their own landscapes. And many times when national parks are created, a lot of indigenous people have been marginalized as a result of that. And so our project actually tries to work with those individuals that have been marginalized, and to focus on ways in which they want to protect their landscape and to bring them into that sphere. So I work both with indigenous communities, in particular with women. So Nepal also is deeply patriarchal, and so we try to find ways in which young people, young marginalized youth from these communities to participate. And so for me, I think these are issues that we really need to consider and need to engage with. And normally when you think about biodiversity conservation or environmental activism, you don't necessarily think that indigenous people or people from marginalized background would be interested. But it was really we've met and worked with a lot of different farmers that are very much passionate about about protecting their landscapes, and so we've been working with them. And so over the last 4 years, I've been working full-time on this project, and there have been a lot of sort of young women, young men from these communities who have stepped up as leaders, whether it's protecting species such as pangolins or an entire high altitude lake landscape, which is happening in the higher region of our project. So yeah, it's I think we need to start, how do we engage these communities is where we need to, I think, start the discussion with in each of our projects that we're doing. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Priyanka. It sounds like a great and important project. Let's continue with Karen.
Thanks so much, Gerardo. It's amazing to see, I see some familiar names of people here, and reading through the questions, there's such a wealth of knowledge and experience. So I'm excited to get to the next part, and also invite everyone to show your faces if you're not feeling shy, because we'd love for this to start now to be a more community sort of event. So, looking at spatial justice, of course, it's in opposition to injustices that we can see in the built environment. And unfortunately, it's just too common and too obvious, right? It's we know how often we can go to different cities in the United States and see a freeway that has cut through a low-income community of color and destroyed houses and upended lives. And that's just one of the many ways that we can see injustices in the built environment. So Mena went a step beyond what I was going to say. I was going to talk about how important it is to define justice locally. She said to define space, so that's, I suppose, a step beyond. But looking precisely at what injustices exist in the communities we're working in. And my work specifically has focused primarily on housing and health. I believe that housing is a human right, and my work is always going toward a time when everyone in the United States is well housed in housing that they can afford. And also believing that housing is health care, and looking at the links between what the role of architecture and urban design and much larger impacts in people's lives. So Gerardo asked to give a few examples of our work. So I'm a Californian. I've spent the last 16 years in New York, and this is a grateful return to the West Coast. So my, the majority of my professional life has been in New York, and I've worn a lot of hats, always working toward housing justice, toward racial justice, through different ways. So I started my career as a sort of normal designer. When you meet someone at a party, you say you're an architect. I was doing the thing that they think you do, which is to design buildings, to do drawings. And I've gone on to use my architectural training in different ways, running a nonprofit called the Institute for Public Architecture that put on public programs asking, how the design of housing can meet larger goals for equity in the city. From there, a lot of my work has been collaborating with city agencies on projects connecting design and social justice and design as health. Most of those in housing, but also projects like Mental Health by Design, where I worked with the Department of Health in New York City to go into 15 high-need high schools in New York and turn disused classrooms into spaces promoting mental health. And then I've had the pleasure of teaching for about 7 years now, and then also writing and editing. So using an editorial platform to elevate people's very good ideas and questions on spatial justice and housing, and to get those out into the world with the ultimate goal of changing what's going on in the real world. So as Gerardo mentioned, my last book was called Housing as Intervention, Architecture Towards Social Equity. That's a collection of 17 essays published by Architectural Design that asks these questions in an international context. And within this fellowship, I'm working on a new book called, my lovely assistant, Luigi is here, working on a new book, Good Neighbors, which is an update of the 1997 book of the same name, which collects the best case studies of affordable housing in the United States. Again, to circulate best ideas to elevate the quality and availability of affordable housing in the United States.
Okay, thank you, Karen, and thank you for the good work you do around housing. Yeah, seeing housing as a human right instead of a commodity, I think is the key to improving our housing situation. How about Corey, please?
Thank you, Gerardo. All right. Thank you all attendees. It's great to be here. My research is on the spatial qualities of homelessness. And so I'm just going to start by just saying a few things about injustice, because I think that's a lot easier. So there's a couple of aspects of the communities that I work with in terms of injustice regarding the form of that. And the first would be the sort of identity and aesthetics of homelessness, the assigning of a certain category to people based on whatever is thought like the dirt, the ineptness, the bad decision-making of a perceived person. And this kind of gets wrapped up in our minds with the spaces that they inhabit, going back and forth. And these spaces that people inhabit are often out of reach of design, or those people are designed out of that space. So that's the first one. The second kind of injustice is that homelessness is not a problem of unclean people doing the wrong things in unclean space. It's really a problem of people being denied basic services, access to basic services that all require space. Most of the rest of us kind of take for granted, such as clean water, waste disposal, based on the lack of having a house or an address. So space in this example is used, or the lack of space is used to discriminate. Now, spatial justice, as a couple of the other fellows have already said, is a little bit harder to define. There's a lot of different definitions. I'm just going to use an example from my own work in research, just to sort of provide a picture of what it might look like. In Sacramento, after there was a series of large encampments and tent cities that were removed, and a group called Safe Ground was created by politically active people that did not have shelter. And they used this organization to fight for a right to shelter or right to housing, as others have alluded to. And they practiced sheltering in this kind of rotating, self-governing encampments, usually near the river. And they worked out an arrangement with the police to be left alone as long as they moved every 2 weeks or so. And they did all of this in a very visible way. They tried to promote themselves. They were not hiding, to ensure that the right to shelter idea was always at the front of the sort of political and civic discussions that the city was having around homelessness. So for me, that example is that spatial justice means a sort of self-governance. It's a very active or participatory thing. It means having a voice. It means working with different others to solve a problem, and all as part of inhabiting a space.
Okay, thank you, Corey. Yeah, I think pointing to examples is always a very useful exercise. And that's a really clear example of self-organization and creating voice. So thank you for that. Craig?
Hi, okay. Thank you very much, Rollo, for the introduction and sort of hosting and moderating this. I also want to echo echoes to Karen, who did an amazing job pulling some of us screaming and dragging and kicking to sort of make this thing happen. So thank you very much. And I did, I obviously want to do a shout out to just the fellows program in general, which, I wish it wasn't a fellows program. I wish it was just part of the curriculum in general, and not just at Oregon, but every place. But applause to the forward-thinking faculty and administration in the college that said, we're going to make this thing, we're going to make it happen because it's important. Okay, so I maybe felt somewhat similarly with everybody, other fellows, about how do you define spatial justice, and maybe not so much because it was sort of difficult to define, but I think it's so intrinsic to what I've grown to do, not only professionally but personally, that it felt very much like describing myself, and that's kind of hard to do. But I gave it a shot, and so this is kind of what I would argue my definition of spatial justice is. And anyone who's taken my class prior to this, or even is taking my class now, I see some of my students are here. My current students are here. If you've come to one of the couple of lectures I've done, you've probably heard me say this before, that space is life. And I really sort of believe that to be true. And I say it because, to maybe echo what Corey was talking about, access to the benefits of public space is really the place where all other benefits flow, like health and wealth, prosperity. It provides citizens with clean air, clean water, clean land, and opportunities for healthy foods and green space and safe recreation and public transportation, and place where you can express yourself, places where you can meet people, where you can enjoy camaraderie and be social. Space is life. And if you don't have access to it, you're literally being denied a portion of your life. So therefore, to have spatial justice for me is to remove all barriers and obstacles that prevent equitable access to space, whether it's physical, whether it's financial, whether it's visual, whether it's legal, or something else. And note that I say equitable. I'm not talking about equal access. I'm talking about equitable access, and there's a difference. So say there's a park in neighborhood A, and there's a park in neighborhood B. Now that's equal. But if the park in neighborhood A is unmaintained, is unkept, has deteriorating equipment, and is without maintenance, and the other one is not, that's not equitable. So there's a difference between equal and equitable. And I think spatial justice for me is about creating an equitable environment and identifying those things that are barriers to that and attempting to address them, whether it's on a policy level, whether it's on a design level, whether it's on a planning level, whether it's on a resource level. So in short, that would be sort of my perspective about spatial justice. So how do I deal with that? How does that manifest itself in my world and in my work? Well, I write, and I write a lot. And I write about issues of space. I write about issues of race and access and empowerment, justice, community engagement. But I don't just write those things for scholarly magazines or for books. I do that. But I try to make that material as accessible as possible. It's not just in the hands of scholars and policymakers to make these decisions, but it's also in the hands of the everyday folks who live in neighborhoods that are being, that have disinvestment, that have issues, that find themselves being gentrified, and they have, gentrifying is really sort of the straw man in the area. Everybody hates the gentrification. But if you do, clearly we still haven't figured out a way to get around it. So maybe people don't hate it so much. But how do you provide people with tools and the knowledge and maybe even just the language to be able to sit down and talk to architects and talk to planners and talk to policymakers and let them know, what they feel about these kinds of. So I try to write in a way that empowers people to feel like they have a right to talk about and their concerns, and they also have the language and the ability and the background to talk about these issues. In practice, I've mainly participated in sort of spatial justice projects through design centers. I've been lucky enough to be a part of 3, and every single one of them has made my life and made my work much more meaningful. I don't think I'd be the practitioner that I am today had I not had those experiences. One was in Chicago, another one was in Minneapolis, and I ran one here in Detroit for about 8 years. So that's one way. there are particular projects that I can talk about, but I don't think we're here for that. And I've actually talked about them in other lectures as well, so I won't really go into those.
Sorry, Craig, that's something that definitely you could discuss in the breakout sessions, I think.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I can. Yeah, I'm not going to waste the time for that. There are other two areas that I would like to just sort of mention quickly is research. I do research. My workshop last semester went down and looked at an area in Alabama called Africatown. They did an amazing survey of the buildings in the area. We talked about the many ways in which the concepts of spatial justice were showing up in the location that they were looking at. They wrote a nice, more than nice, they wrote this very powerful document sort of explaining where they saw issues of spatial injustice. So research is part of the thing that I work on as well. And then finally is education. Somebody was speaking earlier about trying to engage children or young adults in the process of placemaking and ownership and having ownership of their environment. I established a high school program here in Detroit, ran that for about 8 years as well. So that, again, trying to get more folks who understand these sort of spatial injustice issues into the pipeline so they can become practitioners, they can become planners, they can become policymakers. They bring another perspective to the field that often does not get the kind of voice as it's presently constituted. So those are the ways in which I attempt to make my desire for spatial justice manifest.
Great, and that's actually a really good way to transition into our second question, because our second question is about student activism and professionalization of this. So the question is, explain effective ways to integrate spatial justice into your teaching and describe how you inspire and support student activism. In addition, describe some of the challenges and opportunities you've experienced in your career around social justice. So maybe since I definitely want to get to the breakout sessions, maybe just take one of those questions and then, yeah, just one of those.
Okay,
And,
I'll start. Yeah,
okay.
it's fine. So how do you sort of integrate it into teaching? Well, I mean, some of this is going to sound Pollyanna, but I don't think it is. It's just you have to make a choice. You have to make it a priority to do it. You have to make it a priority to talk about it. You have to make it a priority to even debate it with your colleagues, with your students. Nothing's going to happen unless you start talking about it. That's the first step that has to happen. And other ways in which I try to integrate it, I mean, I do the talking, but the course I'm teaching now is called Design, Activism, and Social Justice. Duh, I'm teaching it. I teach a studio elsewhere, and it's an activist studio, activist architecture studio. It is, I make it a point to throw these issues on the table and have very serious conversations around why is it that we practice this way? Why is it that we allow ourselves to design places that literally design out people? Is that really something that we want to be doing as professionals? That's not our job as professionals. Our job is to design for the environment. It's health, safety, and welfare. Welfare means it's a big thing. It's not health, safety, and welfare for our client. It's health, safety, and welfare for everybody. So how do you deal with that question when we live in a very real world where somebody is paying our bills and it's probably not always the person is going to be engaging in our space? We've got to do it. So that would be my response.
Okay, let's go with Corey. We'll go backwards this time. We'll go.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's fine. Thank you. Yeah, I'll tackle that too. I think as far as teaching, I mean, the students that I've met already are doing many things. They're already active in their communities. Many of them are already advocating for people without shelter, for instance. And this challenge for me is to kind of keep up sometimes with that. I think that starts with when you're forming a class and the syllabus. Oftentimes, has been alluded to by Craig, that these are not the sort of mainstream classes that are required. And so then when you're promoting your class, you really have to advertise, and you promote a big idea and attract, hopefully, an interdisciplinary student group to your course. And then I think the second thing I would have to say about student activism is it's kind of allowing them to facilitate some of these classes and maybe change the schedule to topics that they are participating in. So last year I was teaching a course on green building. I kept I'm afraid going on and on about LEED because that was part of the requirements of the class, and the students came to me and said, hey, we're tired of LEED, we want to do the living building challenge. So I had to change the last assignment to be living building oriented, to be more radical in a sense. And then finally, I think I would say that you can bring advocacy into the classroom as well. Tomorrow we have a seminar on homelessness that is kind of interdisciplinary. We have a couple of guests coming who currently reside in the emergency respite shelters in Eugene. This was not my initiative. This was one of our students, Sarah, who works with them. She arranged it, but the condition that they attend our discussion, that they participate, is that we will present their argument for staying in the shelter long-term to the people we know in the city. So they're willing to come in and share their experiences with us, but we have to be advocates for them as a class.
Okay, thank you, Corey. And I'm trying to also, I'm looking at the clock, and I definitely want to get to the groups, because that's really where we're going to have a lot of these robust discussions. So why don't we go with Karen?
Thanks. Yeah, I think one of the, I mean, you know, working with the students at Oregon is definitely the greatest part about this fellowship. And I'm grateful to Aaron and Nancy and Justin for giving us the chance to, you know, produce experimental courses in collaboration with the students. And I'm also looking at, I see Howard and some other faculty who, you know, who are doing amazing work. And also one of the draws of coming to Oregon was to build on, of course, the strengths around sustainability, on all these things being connected. So specifically, I feel lucky to have had the chance to further research on housing and health in collaboration with students. 3 examples: teaching a studio in the fall with Portland artist Cleo and Keen Davis, working in the historically Black neighborhood of Albina. Our project called Rebuilding Cornerstones Toward Spatial Justice for Portland's Black Diaspora. Then, you know, another course, getting to work alongside students. The course titled Good Neighbors, the same as my book, but in that case, really analyzing, you know, the state of affordable housing in the United States and how we communicate about it. And then this quarter, I feel very lucky to be working with students in a studio called Visualizing Health Equity, where we are following the lead of groups like APANA, which was an Asian American group in Portland. So following the lead of people most impacted by environmental justice issues. And I think in terms of challenges, it's really interesting to see the students are amazing and doing empathetic research. How do you look at the assets and inequities in a community? And now the challenge is maintaining that lens as we move into design work and not getting into like architect brain, but really maintaining that.
Thank you, Karen. Priyanka?
Hi. Yeah, so I've actually only primarily for the past 6 years been working with young people in whether in Nigeria or rural Nepal. So my teaching experience in the Western world is really 3 months last term. And so what I've been doing primarily is, our project started with acknowledgement of how Indigenous people have been shaping and protecting their landscapes. And so for me, what's very important is to really pass down that information to the young people in that areas. And so the way in which I've been doing that is through a Youth Fellows program in Nepal, where we've recruited marginalized individuals 18 to 35. And in particular, I just wanted to mention one individual, Ganga, who's landless individual who came to our program with an ambition to learn AutoCAD, and that was how we started the conversation. Middle of nowhere in a rural village in Nepal, and she wanted to learn AutoCAD, but her focus was entirely on technology, and so that's how we started the conversation. But then in the period of the last 4 years, what we ended up doing was not only teaching her AutoCAD, but also how to record videos, use SLR cameras, and to edit these videos in Adobe Premiere Pro, use InDesign, Illustrator, everything you can, every program you can name it. And through the course of learning the programs, what we started doing was actually documenting the Indigenous knowledge of the farmers. And and through this duration, what ended up happening as a result of engaging her was not only that her capacity was built, but also her knowledge of her own landscape increased fundamentally. She's now, been featured on CNN, won Young Naturalist Awards, and so an individual like Ganga would probably never have had the opportunity, because she's from the socioeconomic background that she's in, and because of also her interest in, technology, because she's also a woman. And so I think what I have been trying to do, and what we need to continue to do, ensure that the individuals, from those communities are engaged, and that we provide them with tools and technology and platform to be able to, whether it's recording the knowledge or participating in the conservation, which is what she's doing right now. And also she's actually building a new cohort of fellows as well. So that's one thing that I wanted to mention. The other thing is that the challenge that I face is that we're not just speaking about human species, we're also looking at non-human species. So when you're thinking about biodiversity, you have to go beyond our species. And so how do we now engage an individual, to acknowledge the non-human species dimension? And I did a short sort of exercise with the students in Oregon, and then participants in a conference in Goa, and also young people in the rural communities in Nepal, called Being a Bird. And so where they had to shift sort of their anthropocentric frame of mind and to begin to think like a bird, not act like a bird, but think like a bird, and try to comprehend, how do you now, how does a bird sort of navigate through space and create space, and how do we start to engage with that? And what ended up happening through this period, and throughout the 3 workshops with 35 different participants from Oregon to Nepal, was that there was a curiosity that was generated, in the young people about these different species and the crises that they are having right now, and also an interest to participate and to do something about it. And so a lot of the young people in Koshitapu, which is where we're working, which has approximately 5% of all world's birds. So the young people there could immediately, start doing something about those species. So I think we have to continuously remind ourselves to engage people from the communities where we're working at the same level as we would a typical designer or students from the Western world. I think that's very important. I think that's all I have.
Okay, thank
All I
you.
want to say right now.
Okay, Minna?
Yes, I know you want me to be concise so that we can move to the rooms, but
Yeah, it's okay. Take your time. You're good.
okay, I will not. No, not on this point. So during this fellowship, I had the chance, and also thank you to Erin and Nancy for giving me this chance and allowing me to go crazy a bit with my syllabi. So we had a chance to look at the things I'm really passionate about in architecture education. I think are really needed to somehow educate an architect who can work towards spatial justice. So the first thing is having an architect who has a say in what kind of practice they want to have and offering them different kinds of practice. So we are now working on a squatting studio in which the students are looking at ways to work around laws. So what do we do if we have to work around laws and find the cracks within the system? And we're also hoping for our design build to be manifested. I'm working with Corey Parker here on developing the city for the unhoused community in partnership with the Lane County Kitchen. And when I came here, I started also implementing or trying to implement the other agenda I have, which is the emotional training of the architect and thinking of relational practice. How do we train our architects emotionally? How do we produce an architect that can perform with empathy, can practice with empathy? But above all, and I'm going to say this from the rooftop and the mountaintop, educational economics. I think this is something very, very important, and I try to implement in my work here, and my students know because I make them dumpster dive for their models because we run zero cost studios or zero cost classes. Our practice is pretty elitist, and I have by now practiced in 5 different universities, 4 different countries, I guess 3 different continents, I'm trying to count, and it's always the same thing. Our department, our students spend more money than their neighbors in other faculties. Our department becomes this tool of social engineering in which the elite who can afford it come in and join. I know it's in the US, it's pretty different because you already have to pay a chunk of money to get into a university in the first place. But even if you go to countries where education is free, architecture still carries a lot of burden. Architecture carry a lot of burden to go into their studio and build all these pretty models. So I think this is central. We need to make our education accessible, and even if not for you guys who are here, do it for those who are coming after. I've tried to counsel architecture students going in, and I've seen people divert into other areas, and often people from more economically deprived background go to different studies because architecture is known for being this expensive and this very elitist space. So spend no money during your education, please, and ask for it. Kindly and politely ask your professor, and I try to do it. I have some of my students here, they don't really like it all the time, because we also are very clear that even though we're not going to buy anything, we still have computers. That's something that's not it's not accessible to everybody. We have internet, and we can see now with this move to online how this is a privilege to many of our students, not just people elsewhere in the third world. And this being us all working and verbalizing it, vocalizing it. We should not pay money. We should not make this an exclusive place by the virtue of, or for the reasons of producing all these fabulous work. We need to find alternative ways to practice architecture, minding educational economics, and not spending any money for those who are coming in. And I know I spend too much time on this, but I say it again from the rooftops, it's the most important thing to me right now. I have seen too many people get excluded from this, just from the door. They don't get into you don't see them even. They just come at the door, know how much it is to print a banner, and they go do accounting.
Right. Thank you, Manna. So yeah, you're all doing very diverse and inspirational work, and I wish we would have made this into a 2-hour event. But I do want to give you the 30 minutes in discussion, and so we're not going to have time for the the report back session. But let me focus on the. Let's see if I remember how to do this. Okay, so yeah, so I'll still, can you see that? You can see that? Okay,
Yeah.
so yeah, it's, the fellows will go ahead and facilitate the 30-minute discussions, and it's just really an informal conversation. I mean, you saw the great work that they're doing, so it's just another way of you being able to get into more of those details. Is everyone back now?
Unfortunately, yes.
Okay, you were having a good conversation.
We were having a great conversation, and you, like a mother or a father, comes in and says, "Okay, turn off the lights. The bed. It's bedtime now. Everybody go to bed."
That's right. I wish you would have had more time to do this. So, like I said, we're not going to have time to do a kind of reporting back on what you talked about. But I was in one of the groups, and the conversation was exciting and so forth. But what I wanted to quickly do is just talk about some of the themes that I saw. So one of them is the diversity that exists in the spatial justice work. I mean, I don't think we defined what spatial justice was, and I think that's fine. I think what we really got out of this is understanding how diverse the work is. So affordable housing, access to public spaces, indigenous ecology, just to name a few. That was one of the themes. The second one is this issue of creating space. I think that's really important. So there, people talked about decolonizing space, appropriating, having people appropriate their own space, as a form of empowerment, so they could have a greater voice in our cities, in our towns. And then the third thing was how, even though we're doing all this diverse work, it seems that our disciplines are facing similar issues. And I think there's a need for us to work, closer together in terms of the different disciplines. I mean, I'm an urban planner, and I saw, all the things that the architects were talking about are things that we're dealing with as well. And so I think that's the third thing. So we are out of time. I want to thank the fellows for giving us their time with them and representing the diverse work that they're doing. Oh, Craig, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I have a question or comment. So I don't know who is the host of this, but I'm willing to stay around and continue having a conversation. Certainly with the folks that were in my group. I think we were talking about if they wanted to. If not, then I'm out. But
well, how about this? How about I end the formal program now? But for those of you that want to stick around and have a good discussion.
Yeah, sure. Okay, I guess I can send out another, but I don't know how I would make that public for all the people who are already on the screen.
I think he means you would. I think you could just leave the channel open. Is that what you mean, Gerardo?
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Yeah, if you could make me host, and then I could just pick up from here, and then everybody else who wanted to leave could leave, and then everybody else could just stay if they wanted to.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Yeah, I can.
So I think Sean, you can make that.
You bet. Hang on a sec.
And Gerardo, is this going to be the recording or transcript or something going to be available to people somehow?
Yes, yes, it will be. So.
There you go, Craig. You are now one of the hosts along with Gerardo and myself.
Okay, Fantastic. So I'm going to hang around as long as anybody else wants to hang around, and we can continue talking about stuff. But I just, before everybody takes off, just thank you very much for coming. And again, to Karen and Nancy and Aaron and Geraldo and everybody else who made this happen. Thank you very much. It's very much, and my fellow fellows. So it was quite enjoyable. Thank you.
So now this is the Spatial Justice After Party, is that right?
Yeah, Spatial Justice After Party. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, okay.
So Craig, what kind of things were you talking about in your group?
I want to make sure. I want to see if we were engaged in a particular question, and I want to make sure that they stay. Oh, Beth was here. Yeah. Oh, okay. So we were actually talking about, so we're in this kind of Naomi Klein moment, this sort of, shock doctrine moment where, you have this catastrophe and things try to slip in ways that and otherwise they would not have been able to be considered before. And what I was going to suggest to Beth, because we were talking about, well, we're in this COVID moment. What is design going to be when we come out of this? How is that? How are we going to sort of, deal with spaces and places? And my response before we got cut off was that, well, that's going to be on us as professionals, because we are the ones who are supposed to be the champions of the environment. That's why we have the motto, health, safety, and welfare for everyone, not just for a client. And so, this is our Naomi Klein moment. This is our moment to perhaps push things like spatial justice and make those things relevant and necessary and argue for them, because those are the kinds of things that will keep us safe and keep us healthy, health-wise, environmentally. So, this is on us. This is on us as architects and designers at this moment to provide answers for the rest of society. That is our job. That is why we have a license. That's why we have a monopoly. This is us.
Yeah, and I was going to say, for anyone, just feel free to speak up. I don't know if you have to. If Sean controls that, or
no, I think you can just unmute yourself. That's what we did in our breakout session. We didn't do the chat thing. We just started talking.
Okay.
I'll jump in, and this is what Craig and I were chatting about in our session. Right now, like in many transit systems have dropped 90% of their ridership. And it's actually pretty terrifying. People that formerly took public transit are potentially going to buy used cars in the next few months going forward. And many of our road systems can't accommodate more cars. So in terms of how we're thinking about housing and walkability and equity and how people get to work, I think we have a really interesting opportunity as design practitioners to think quite quickly. Also, mortgages are going to start, potential bankruptcy with people that own 20 Airbnbs and they can't make a $26,000 payment in the next few months because it's unregulated capitalism got a bit wild the last 5 years with the share economy. And those folks don't necessarily have job futures. So yeah, I think this great pause is an amazing opportunity for designers thinking about public space, housing, mobility in new ways, because people are really have this opportunity to retool how they're gonna either work from home or move about the city, start a community garden, a victory garden. Yeah, be curious what other people are seeing about this Naomi Klein moment.
Yeah, I think it's, so go ahead, Karen.
Yeah, I think, I started out by saying that my work is driven by the belief that housing is a human right, and to see so quickly shifts from an idea that living on the street is okay, living in crowded shelters is okay, to governments providing not nearly enough, but hotel rooms for people experiencing homelessness, and that being a push toward actual permanent housing. So I'm interested in the ability to build on that and not go back to where we were. And then also thinking about, we've talked in the smaller group and in this one about connections between the outside world and the communities within our teaching and education. I'm reflecting on how this has made me a better teacher. It's so obvious that so many of us are going through really hard times, and it's so obvious the inequalities existing even in the context of my 14-person studio. Thinking about in a sort of normal context how I can continue to the word care is something that shows up a lot at the University of Oregon that I think is really important, but how I can facilitate a classroom experience that where we're all caring more about each other and our lives, and not just like focusing on producing as much work as possible.
I hope my aspiration would be that, as professionals, we sort of take up the mantle of this responsibility issue and begin to really sort of blaze a trail for, how do we design better commercially so that, people don't get ill? How do we rethink, these mini studios that are, 200, 150 square feet large, and you have 50 of them on the floor, and everybody's paying $1,000 a month rent for these things because they want to be in the city and it's cool. And, how do we sort of rethink the kind of the notions about, living together and what's required? You're in this 200 square foot box because you really want to be in the city, and you can't even get out of your box now. So you don't even have a balcony. You have no way to sort of engage in the environment at all. So, do we really want to continue to sort of propagate that kind of living arrangement just because we can squeeze in more units and make more money as developers, and maybe charge more tax as a city? How do we? So my aspiration is that, we begin to sort of think deeply. And I know people have already been doing this, and maybe we just need to pull together all this research and sort of, okay, so now's the time to implement this stuff. But to say to society that we don't just work for the elite, we don't just work for the corporations, we work for you. That architecture, design, landscape design, environmental design is important for everybody. And it's not just for the people who can afford it. It's not okay to have people living in a neighborhood that don't have access to parks and don't have access to healthy transportation. It's not okay for that to happen, because we see how much it's important. We see it now. So let's not go back to forgetting that, or re-embracing the idea that good design is for wealthy people. Let's not do that. And the way to not do that is to actually show folks that we mean it.
If I might pose a question, we clearly kind of have an understanding of this issue at large, of kind of the wrong set of values, right? Of how many units can we fit into this space so that we can make this amount of money? And I'm wondering, as a designer and as an activist, you know, in what ways can we really change that cultural shift? Does it become more of a political issue? Or is that something that we can influence solely as designers, architects, city planners, etc.?
I would argue that it's both and even more than that. Like the kind of stuff that Karen is talking about housing and health. That's, you know, that is a partnership or a connection or cross-disciplinary issue that I don't want to say it shouldn't go away, because it shouldn't, but that's not the point. The point is that architecture realizes that it's got partners. It's got people and disciplines that where we share common interests, and we can build on that. We can say, how can we and you make a bigger us, and we can make a bigger impact, right? You know, I think there are practitioners and educators who think that way, but I think we need a disciplinary shift. I think we need a professional shift that sees this as the norm, not as something that happens in a catastrophe. That they see this as a norm, so that when somebody says, "Oh, I want to put 50 units on this floor," you go like, "No, A, I'm not going to do it because I know that's unhealthy, and B, here are all the health stats that say that this is a problem." So it's not just me saying it; it's my disciplinary partner saying that. And if you continue to want to do that, then we may have to go to the city and fight you on this, or we may have to go someplace else and fight you on this. It's hard for an architect who's trying to get paid, right, to sort of take that stance alone. But with partners and data and research, it's a much easier argument.
I wanted to raise something and ask a question for everybody, and especially in relation to what you've been saying, Greg. And it's about design being perceived as a tool of exclusion, design itself. We are trying to do a project with the in-house community here in Eugene, and we did some simple research and started asking people who are the customers of the facility we're trying to work with, and asking them, we want to redesign the space. What do you want? They said nothing. We don't want design. Design means you're going to bring us all these things, and now we're going to have to deal with it with gloves on and not be able to throw our cigarette here. So there is this idea of design being a social marker and an exclusionary thing. But on the other side, if you ask them, well, about colors, yes, we want colors. About greens, yes, we want greens. But this idea of design itself, I think, historically and with our practice, it's our fault, ended up being this thing. And I would like to see what do you all think about this? Craig, what do you think about this, especially in relation to your note about altering practice? It's on our shoulder now.
I'm not sure what the question there was.
So what do you think about this notion that actually people who can't afford design don't want design anymore because it is now perceived as an exclusionary marker? The space was designed is going to kick them away.
I think,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think that there is a preset kind of thing that has been used in the society, that the people with somewhat so financially low or something, we say that they are living in such conditions in slum areas or something, say so over the generations they have come up with the same idea that they would be living in the same place. So that comes in the terms of population, it comes of in the density, which also can be seen in the example of India, particularly Mumbai, which is happening in Dharavi. Dharavi is a slum area which is about 520 acres with over the population of 70 lakhs actually. It's much more, and the people are living there and they expect that. And the government is also not more of interested in helping the social justice. And this is why the COVID thing is going on very fast between them. Though if there could be any a midway, like slightly moving them from those spaces, creating some advertisements, some kind of advantages points to them, so that they would be able to understand in terms of the quality of living, in terms of the benefits that they will get when we'll try to create some the qualities what we are studying, we are not able to implement in that the poor. There's a book of Hassan Fethi, The Architecture for Poor. So that was actually a very good book, which speaks a lot about the spatial justice. So I think that there should be a very gradual move slightly, because they cannot directly turn into something very, very hypothetical, or maybe like that thing.
Can I object very quickly on the Hassan Fethi book?
The what?
He just cited a book by Hassan Fethi titled
Oh, okay, go ahead. Yeah, sure.
Architecture Poor. So please, I would like to object on that. It's first of all, it was not architecture poor. It was an established technique of building that existed in that area for years. And so I come from Egypt, in which Hassan Fethi is God. So I will shut up now, but I would advise you to just take a critical distance and look at the book again. He did so many great things, but also look at the architectural output of Hassan Fethi that has been then abandoned by the poor. They did not want it. Just I'm gonna shut up now.
Thank you.
One thing that I kind of want to talk about is this idea that once we're in the field and we try to apply these things that we've been talking about, one growing disillusion that I've gotten in my own academic career is that I'm kind of loathing almost to the point that I have to graduate and get into the workforce, and like everything that I've learned, everything that I know that has to be done is off the window, because now architecture has become just a tool for capital or increased value of capital. And I mean, you see it within at least within my own friend group, that kind of like, at least back in Salt Lake, when they see who's going through a huge urban renewal as of right now, and they see any sort of new development as just exclusionary in nature, regardless of what it is. There is already architecture, I feel like, is getting this bad rep almost with non-designers specifically, about like, oh, any sort of new development is automatically being categorized as just bad and displacing. And in a way, it makes me a little bit, I'm trying to kind of create a more awareness, or kind of create a little bit, make peace with the fact that I'm trying to do good, and I'm trying to like actually create quality work that it doesn't perpetuate this. And I find solace in knowing that there are institutions out there like Architectural Lobby, for instance, that actually are trying to kind of change things through their own terms in their professional career. But it's hard. Like, you're not going to be able to find like a firm that is going to be completely on board with it, or that is doing necessarily all the things that need to be done. And it's important to understand like that we have to kind of make peace with that in a way, or at least become almost like a sleeping agent, right? Of like, when the opportunity comes for us to implement these things as young professionals going into a workforce, that we are able to kind of bring a new life to a new as a new generation of professionals. At least that's kind of what gives me solace going into the professional field, and actually knowing that like we can be a tool for change periodically, hopefully.
And that connects, Luigi's comment connects. I want to acknowledge Carolina's comment in the chat that's related to what Luigi just talked about, how those of you, I guess I graduated a while ago, who are graduating now and figuring out how to, do this kind of stuff in the real world and to start dialogues.
If I can just sort of add something here, it's something that I sort of preach to my design activism students, is something I was mentioning in our breakout session, is that, listen, the profession is nothing without the members in it. I mean, that's basically what a profession is. It's just its membership. And so, you know, the kinds of things that we argue the profession focuses on now, that's not a natural thing. That's a thing that has been developed by the members inside of it. And if it has been developed, it can be redeveloped. It can be dismantled and focused on other things. And so, you know, for my generation, I'm done. I'm not, you know, but you guys are, you're the profession. You are going to be the profession. I mean, that's how the profession proliferates. That's how it keeps itself going. You will be the profession. So you have a chance to sort of reshape what the focus is. What does it mean to practice architecture? And you know, who really is our client base? And how do we reshape what we do so that more people recognize how important our role is in the built environment? I mean, you can do that. You can start doing that whether you're working or not. You can start finding like-minded people to begin having this conversation and begin to invite more people in, begin this sort of stage. You know, I'm a big proponent of conversations and writing and all the other sorts of stuff, the ways that you can actually get right to people who can actually use your services, but you have to figure out a way that you can communicate strongly with them about why you're important. We're at a moment now where you can talk about art, you can talk about design and COVID, and people will get it like that. They'll get it like that. I mean, you really could. And I'm not a sort of, you know, another thing I so try to talk about is that, you know, nobody wants to have a practice that's based on catastrophe. You know, that would just bum anybody out. Like, you don't really become important until there's a problem, right? But when there's a problem, you don't shy away from it. And, you know, by addressing the problem, you know, you might hopefully begin to show people how much you matter. And so you're building a clientele while you're actually doing something that your skills allow you to do. So you broaden the definition of architecture. Maybe the architecture isn't always a building or an object. Maybe it's something else. And so you have an opportunity to shape that. And you shouldn't squander it just because, oh, I haven't graduated yet, or I haven't found a job yet, or I haven't passed my exam yet, or I can't get people in the office to understand what I'm talking about. You don't have to wait on any of that stuff.
Do you think that question could be framed in terms of what are the things that architecture can control and
Sure.
what things cannot control?
Sure.
And how to focus on what it can control and not waste energy on that which falls beyond its control, or try to, yeah.
This is, sorry, there's something I kind of wanted to bring up also. This is like what social change through design, right? Like understanding what are the limits of an architect, which kind of ties into this, but what is, like, because I hear both stories. We know like what we have to do, but at the same time, we have also a voice that tells us like there is a limit, but I think it's a healthy understanding of it. But
yeah, I completely and totally agree. I mean, we are architects. We bring or landscape architects, designers. We bring a certain kind of expertise, right? You know, we can't try to be social workers because we're not social workers. You know, but we can partner with social workers. We can bring in the stuff that we're good at and partner with the things that we don't have expertise in. What we don't want to do is do what was done in the 50s and 60s when architecture decided that it could design away social ills. It could through architecture alone, it could design better behavior for people, and we could raise everybody's living conditions, and everybody can move to the middle class, right? This is part of the sort of modernist, early modernist project, right? Is that we're going to get rid of all this sort of historical stuff. We're going to get rid of all notions about history. We're going to build more efficiently so we can build for more people, and we can raise everybody's standard of living. But you know, what good is a home if, I mean, a new place to live if you don't have the money to keep up the maintenance, or you know, the schools in the area are horrific. You know, architecture cannot solve everything because there are no architecture problems per se. Architecture is a part of society, but only a part. It's not all of it. So yeah, there are going to be things that we can address, and then there are things that we can address with other people or other disciplines, and there are going to be some things that we can't address at all, no matter how many people we partner with.
I think one of the things that came up in our breakout was how daunting it might seem to kind of take on this added information set around spatial justice, especially as architecture students, because you have so much on your plate, and there are people coming from different baselines of a starting point when it comes to some of these issues. And you know, I'm in a real like self-reflection mode because I'm 10 years out of graduate school now and thinking about like, what kind of work do I want to do and how do I want to reflect back to the field? And I think about it in a way of like, my sense of aesthetics or my point of view in aesthetics, that cultivated over time. And I kind of conditioned my point of view like a muscle, you know? And I think that you can do the same thing with your own values. And when you do that and kind of look at and be reflective about what values do you want to bring to the work, it becomes more of like a reflex to operate from those values. And, you know, I think thinking about it that way in like a personal way, it can help when you're approaching the work so it doesn't feel as overwhelming, because at a certain point, you'll have to think about it, but it'll become much more reflexive. You know, so for me as a planner, it's been a lot of like values first, you know, transparency, ground up planning, things like that have become like these mantras, and they play in my head all the time now. And so it's easier for me to bring it to the work.
Am I pronouncing this correct? Is that Suja?
It's Preeti Sodhi.
Oh no, there's another gentleman's got his hand up.
Yeah, sorry.
Is that correct, Suja?
Yes.
Did I pronounce that correctly?
No, that is Shuja.
Shuja. Oh, okay. You don't have to raise your hand, man. I'm not moderating this, so you can just jump in just like everybody else. So.
Sorry, I didn't raise my hand.
No, don't. I'm not. I don't want to be anybody's moderator. So just jump in.
I think it's really important what we keep talking about, design here and architecture with emphasis on the built world, and I think that's very important. But I think it's very important to consider writing and publications. I mean, thinking through writing is really important, and it's a great way of getting like-minded individuals together, whether it be online by a blog or creating a publication or anything. It's like that it can create a forum for people to bring ideas together. That doesn't necessarily have to be totally focused on the building. I think also Dr. Sandoval is talking here about radical architecture, and the focus here of a lot of history of radical architecture is that it wasn't necessarily focused on the built, that there was a focus about communication of ideas, about the exploration of the world through writing.
Manifestos, man.
Absolutely.
I think that every city should have particular statistics regarding the people, about the per capita income of a person, and how a particular building could generate the employment thing, and how architect could, consult that statistics of the city and then kind of socially think that how many people who are unemployed could get employment or such thing. I'm just thinking.
Anybody want to take that on, or want to throw out something else that we can talk about?
I have something else to throw out.
Okay.
Through this whole discussion, I've kind of been thinking about what we were kind of touching on earlier with the shock doctrine, and something I've been thinking about since I read that, Craig, and since I guess all of this COVID stuff is happening. Kind of like I'm kind of feel like I'm hitting a wall. I don't really understand what is the first step to be done in terms of like trying to change the profession now that we have this opportunity to show people our value. So thinking of like crisis potentially bringing about change, I lived in New Orleans during Hurricane Katrina and saw some, like, first-handedly witnessed, people being taken advantage of in a time of crisis. So I guess my question is kind of like, how do we prevent that from happening now? I just don't, I can't really like wrap my head around what that looks like. Like, how do you actually prevent, the systems higher up from taking advantage of people right now because of this pandemic?
Anybody?
Gotta be an activist and a designer, not a combination of both, but have to be able to kind of maybe at some degree a combination of both. But it's important, I think, to kind of differentiate where to apply those and apply the things that you learn as a designer into your activism and the things that you learn from your activism into your design. At least, I mean, there are institutions out there, like, again, I'll probably plug in Architectural Lobby, for instance, that are creating a little bit more of a sense of like what the position of an architect is, and like seeing it, although it is more seen as in the perception, I think, for labor and our profession in itself as a form of labor. I think if you're looking for like-minded individuals, that's a place where I was able to find other architects that feel the same way how I feel about our profession and how it can be changed, and they're actively trying to become a force of change within their field in a more gradual way, at least.
I think that the governance really matters. Like the governance really encourages every profession to work. If we know if there's a governance who actually supports the poor or actually supports these type of situations in which it actually helps each one of the country, of the nation equally, then every profession will actually contribute towards the same thing. It's all about, like, as per me, it's all about psychological flow. Like, if there is a flow of justice in the city, in the country, in the hearts of the governance, then the people equally contribute. So this is what I think.
I'd also add that it's really difficult to judge justice without having access to space and to have public spaces. And I think currently in our current situation right now of social isolation, while it's very important, it's very difficult for people to be able to organize with each other and to be able to prevent injustices from happening because they may not be visible, or perhaps our ability to perceive them may be distorted by our own siloing of information. I think that challenging those communication networks and reestablishing the ways that we are able to connect with the people around us is very important. This is obviously a really interesting method here because we're able to have people from all over the world in one particular space. But I would think that to me, it's very concerning is the inability to do labor organizing or tenant organizing when everybody's in their houses. It's something I'm concerned about. I have no answers to it, but I think that thinking about communication networks is very, very important right now.
I think also, so I'm in Peter Key's architectural context class right now, and
I'm sorry, what's the class?
Architectural context. It's Arc 430.
Okay.
And so, you know, one thing. So he's a part of the Better Housing Together, I believe that's the name of it. And just, you know, I asked him just offhandedly, you know, well, how does one start to change the system? You know, how does one as a designer really influence this? Because we can design, you know, whatever we want as a broad term, but it really comes down to government policy of how people are cared for and how our cities are set up. And one thing he encouraged was, you know, just getting involved in local government. You know, and it's something that I think not a lot of people consider, and it's something that I certainly hadn't really considered, but I'm considering now. You know, just something as simple as a neighborhood association. You know, that has, you know, maybe its impact is very local, but you got to start somewhere, right?
Yeah, I mean, there've been a couple of interesting pieces that have been written on the term citizen architect. You know, most recently it was, I don't want to say it was usurped, but it was sort of spun in a very particular way by Samuel Mockbee, who established the Rural Studio at Auburn University. But the citizen architect goes all the way back to Thomas Jefferson. And so it is about recognizing the fact that you practice architecture, but that is not necessarily what defines you. What defines you is that you are actually a person in a society that actually has, you know, I mean, if we want to fall back on the sort of the tenets of democracy itself, you have a responsibility to actually be knowledgeable. You have a responsibility to actually engage in your community and the ways in which things are actually shaped and the way things matter. So, you know, as an architect, you don't always have to think through an architectural lens, or you can think as a person, as somebody who lives in a society who perhaps wants great architecture, right? So, you know, the interesting thing is, and it's just amazing to me all the time, how many people in Congress are lawyers? How many are doctors? You don't see a single architect, not one. Why is that?
Agreed.
The doctors don't have to give up their idea of what medicine or themselves as doctors to become part of the legislative process. Lawyers definitely don't do that. Why is it that we set ourselves apart from that? That's beneath us? It's not beneath us. It should be us.
Yeah, no,
Look, I knew one architect that ran for Senate. I knew one. His name was Harvey Gantt. And he came so close to beating Jesse Helms. And I don't know if you remember who Jesse Helms is or was, but getting close to beating Jesse Helms means you probably would have won in any other state in the United States. And he had been mayor of Charlotte. I don't know if you know Maurice Cox. Maurice Cox is now the head planner in Chicago, but he was also the planner here in Detroit. He also was the head of the National Endowment of the Arts for a while. He was a mayor in Charlotte while he was teaching at University of Virginia. in the architecture department.
And I think, you know, I think it kind of goes hand in hand, governments and designing, right? I mean, we're designing for the people, at least that's our goal. You know, especially with spatial justice, you know, how can we design to you know, further enrich everybody's lives, not just a select few. And with those ideals, it almost seems to go hand in hand with governments, especially in some ways, like city planning as well. You know, it has this direct impact on the city, and you have this experience, you know, and knowledge of how do new buildings and relate to each other, relate to the community, what do they provide for. And it seems with that understanding, it just makes sense for us as architects and designers, you know, to assume that mantle in some ways. I don't know, thoughts on that?
I want to say that before COVID, I went to Bangladesh for internship. So I'm a graduate student in final year from India. So I went there, and there's this architect, Rafiq Azam. So he was sharing with me one thing that earlier he was working for the rich people for their buildings, and he was earning much. And then he got a project of Dhaka city, a park basically, and the language of that park was basically with the walls all around and a small gate. Entry was on a particular time from this to this. So he tried to change this language. He removed the walls and made a you know, very good pathway, and had a very green buffer zone in the between the two pathways, the park pathway and the pathway of the road. And then he tried to open up the whole park and close down the main football fields or the other fields with a closed net with a time, and had this try to make a building which could actually manage the whole park thing. So what he told to me that he had gone through a lot of fight with the contractors, with the local people regarding that. And then, but the outcome was very wonderful, and the people were more engaging into that park, which was more open and green and with a lush green trees than those with the closed boundaries. And the boundaries used to give the illegal shops areas, and that they used to share. So he said that he is now not earning much with these type of projects, but he's very much comfortable in the heart that he is able to see the people engaging into it, and very, you know, very much confined, like he's very happy regarding that. So.
Yeah, I think, you know, I think that's it's kind of a shift that you have to make individually, right? Architecture is, or being an architect is sometimes seen as it's a very lucrative profession, but it can be much more than that, right? It can be an essential service to society, more than just, you know, making these great buildings and making a lot of money and becoming famous.
Well, I would say, at least here in the United States, I don't know about the licensing process any place else, but here in the United States, could be an essential service. It is an essential service. Technically, most of the buildings that go up cannot go up unless we are involved. They just can't. That's just a legal fact. Now, they can change the law, but the way the law stands now is that we are an essential service.
Well, it's technically not the law, it's more of the liability, right? So you have in most places, actually, you don't have to have an architect's signature to get stuff permitted. But it's a good idea in case stuff in case you can wind up getting in a lawsuit.
No, I mean, they're like, Yes, yes, but in all 50 states, for the most part, have 50 different regulations about what constitutes an architect and where and how, which is why NCARB exists. It's supposed to give you a certification that travels all over all the states of the United States. But no, there are some places like out west, a certain type of building, certain square footage, certain height, you can build without an architect. But the kinds of stuff that we consider architecture, the kinds of things that commercial property, homes that you're going to sell, and industrial complexes, museums and galleries and all that stuff. No, that's a law. You got to have architects. You have to have a signature. You have to have a seal. They have to be involved some way. Now they can change all that, but that is and once you get above a certain type of structure, square footage or use or something else, that's when you have to have a professional in. You have to have an architect involved in the process. How much you involve them is up to you.
And
but
who gets to get involved? I mean, now when you're saying the offices that actually get involved in any kind of project at the scale that you're talking about, oftentimes are people who are very, they're going to be driven much more by capital than, say, somebody who is not necessarily, they have a different relationship to the project. I'll just put it that way.
Yeah. Yeah. No, right. No, absolutely. But back to your point earlier about essential services, and we are an essential service, especially when it comes to now I think about it, we're an essential service when it comes to the building industry. Maybe not so much like a doctor or a nurse or something like that, who they're literally handling everything. So
well, personally, I'm at a point where I need to leave, but this has
sure.
been a very great conversation. I really appreciate your idea to extend this further. I think this is a very valuable time to start bouncing ideas around. Well, no, I'm glad. I'm not going to be able to see many of you folks. My time is coming to an end, so I want to try to engage as many people as possible while I have access to folks. So I'm glad a number of people decided to stay around, and I hope it was worth it. So absolutely, it was a pleasure speaking to all of you. Take care.
Nice. All right, take it easy, man.
Bye. Craig, it was great to see you, man. I got to say the same. It's like, oh man, no campus. I can't just see each other on campus.
I know. We didn't get that closing evening drinks and nothing at all. And now I won't be able to. I see everybody on the screen now. No, it's unfortunate. But yes, I was happy to see your face, man. I hope you're doing okay.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I hope that we can do a couple more of these things. Thanks.
Yeah, that would be fine. I would like it.
Let's try to organize something. If we can't do it officially through the school, let's try to get some talks going.
Okay. Sounds good.